The park was full of ordinary afternoon light. A jogger looped the path near the fountain. Two pigeons argued over a pretzel crust near the bench at the south end. Children in bright clothes ran through the spray of the water feature while their parents sat on phones and drank coffee from paper cups and did not notice much at all. It was the kind of afternoon that had no idea it was about to matter. Shelby Carter sat on a bench near the walking path in a maroon zip-up jacket that had seen better seasons, her natural hair pulled back under a headscarf the color of deep coral. She was 29 years old. She had been 29 years old for 4 months, and for 9 days of those 4 months she had been sleeping sitting upright in the back of a 2011 Honda Civic with her 2 daughters, eating gas station sandwiches and counting the change in a Ziploc bag until her fingers knew the weight of $11 by feel alone. Ava, her 7-year-old, sat beside her in a mustard yellow fleece hoodie, reading the back of a granola bar wrapper the way she read everything, like it might contain something useful. Ava was always looking for the useful thing. She had been doing it since she was 4, and Shelby loved her for it and ached for it at the same time. Cora, who was 4, sat on the ground in front of the bench in a peach corduroy jumper, pressing a stick into the soft dirt with complete concentration. Cora approached the world through its textures. She had not spoken for about 20 minutes, which was unusual, and Shelby had been watching the silence move across her daughter's face the way weather moves across a flat sky. When Cora finally looked up, she did not look at the dirt or the stick or the pigeons. She looked straight at her mother. She said, "Mommy, if we eat today, will we starve tomorrow? And if we go back, he will hit you again." Shelby did not move. She had the strangest sensation that the bench beneath her had dissolved and she was sitting on the question itself, held up by nothing but the weight of needing to answer it. She breathed once. She looked at Cora's face, at the total calmness there, the way children ask their most devastating questions without knowing they are devastating, and she felt the particular kind of grief that only arrives when you understand that your child should not yet know the words to say what they just said. She said very quietly, "We are not going back." Ava folded the granola bar wrapper into a small neat square and put it in her jacket pocket without comment. Cora nodded, as though this confirmed a private theory, and went back to pressing the stick into the dirt. 20 feet up the path, a man had stopped walking. He was tall and broad across the shoulders, wearing a cobalt blue wool coat over a white button-down, the collar open at the throat. His hands were in his pockets. His dark hair was swept back from his face and the afternoon light made the tattoos on the back of his left hand visible, a dense pattern of lines and script that ran from his knuckles toward his wrist and disappeared under his cuff. He was the kind of man who took up the right amount of space in any room and did not appear to think about it. He had been on his way to a property meeting at the far end of the park. He had a leather portfolio under his arm. He had been on time. He was no longer walking. He was standing on the path with his head turned toward the bench, and something had happened to his face. Not much, and no one passing by would have named it. But the particular set of his jaw had changed, and his eyes had gone very still, and he was not looking at the woman on the bench with the calculating assessment he gave to most new information. He was looking at her the way a person looks at a memory that has come loose from its place. He had heard that question before. Not from this woman. Not from this bench. From a yellow kitchen in a narrow house in South Brooklyn, when he was 7 years old and his mother was counting coins on the countertop and he had asked her almost the exact same thing, in different words, in a voice that even now he could hear in the lowest register of any quiet room. His name was Dante Moretti. He was the head of a family that controlled 4 neighborhoods and 3 import operations and enough construction contracts to give a mayor pause. He had walked into rooms that made strong men uncomfortable and he had made decisions that he would carry to his grave. He was not a sentimental man. He had worked very hard at not being a sentimental man. He stood on the path in Riverside Park in the clear spring afternoon and he did not walk away. He looked at the little girl in the peach jumper who had gone back to pressing her stick into the dirt with total absorption, and he looked at the woman on the bench who had folded her hands in her lap and was staring at a point somewhere beyond the fountain with the particular expression of a person who has been holding themselves together for so long that they have forgotten what relax feels like, and he made a decision. It was not a decision he could have explained to Sal Conti, his consigliere, or to the 3 men currently waiting for him at the property meeting. It was not a decision that fit into any of the categories he used to organize his days. It was simply the kind of decision that happens when a memory you have kept quiet for 29 years suddenly finds its voice in the open air of a public park and refuses to be quiet anymore. He shifted the leather portfolio under his arm and he took a step off the path toward the bench. Shelby saw him coming from the corner of her eye and her body did what 9 days of sleeping in a car had trained it to do. It went very still and very alert at the same time, the way an animal goes still when it is deciding whether to run. He stopped a few feet away from the bench. He did not crowd them. He crouched down to Cora's level instead of standing over them, which was not what she expected, and he looked at the stick in Cora's hand with what appeared to be genuine interest. He said, "That is pretty good trench work." Cora looked up at him. She considered his face for a long moment with the unsettling thoroughness that 4-year-olds bring to a first assessment. Then she said, "I am making a river." He said, "I can see that. Where does it go?" "Everywhere," Cora said with the confidence of a municipal planner. He smiled. It was a small smile, not the performed kind. Then he looked up at Shelby. She was looking at his hands. The tattoos were detailed up close, geometric lines along the knuckles, and a phrase in small block letters along the inside of his right wrist that she could not quite read from this angle. The hands themselves were not the hands of a man who spent his days behind a desk. He said, "My name is Dante. I'm not trying to bother you. I heard what your daughter said." He paused. "I had a question like that once. When I was about his age." He nodded toward Ava, who was watching him with open and analytical attention. "My mother was the one sitting on the bench." Shelby said nothing. She had learned in the last 9 days that saying nothing was often the safest first move. He said, "There is a deli 2 blocks north. I would like to buy you both a meal if you will let me. No conditions. Nothing attached. Just food." Ava said, "What kind of food?" He said, "What kind do you want?" Ava said, "Hot soup and a sandwich with the crust still on." She said this with the specificity of someone who had been eating sandwiches with the crusts cut off at gas stations for 9 days and had strong feelings about it. Dante said, "That is completely possible." Shelby said, "Why?" He looked at her directly. His eyes were dark and clear, and there was something in them that was not pity. Pity she would have recognized. She had received a great deal of pity in the last 9 days, and it had the particular texture of being looked past. This was something different. This was a man looking straight at her. He said, "Because someone should have done it for my mother and nobody did. That is the whole reason." She studied his face for a long moment. The afternoon light was clean and direct. She could see the small scar along his left jaw, the careful way he was holding himself still so as not to alarm her, the fact that he had not looked at her with anything that needed defending against. She said, "Hot soup and a sandwich with the crusts on." He stood up and offered his hand to Cora, not to Shelby, which was the right instinct, and she noted it. Cora took his hand immediately, which was not like Cora, who did not usually take the hands of strangers. Ava stood up from the bench, folded the granola bar wrapper a second time, and tucked it even more securely into her pocket. At the deli he ordered without looking at the prices. He did not make a thing of it. He sat across from them at a small table near the window, and he let the girls eat before he said anything else, which Shelby also noted. When they had eaten, when Cora had a ring of tomato soup around her mouth and Ava had consumed her sandwich to the last crust with methodical satisfaction, Dante folded his hands on the table and said, "Tell me how long you have been in the car." She told him 9 days. He said, "I have a building on Carmine Street. There is a restaurant on the ground floor that my aunt runs. Above it are 2 apartments. One of them is empty right now. It has 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, clean sheets. It is not being used, and it should be." Shelby set down her coffee cup carefully. She said, "I do not know you." "No," he said. "You do not. But I am offering you a place to sleep that is not a car and food and no conditions whatsoever. You can leave any time you want. The door will not be locked from the outside." She looked at her daughters, Cora drawing a second river on the paper placemat with a crayon the waiter had produced from somewhere, Ava watching Dante with an expression that had shifted, at some point during the meal, from assessment to something that was not quite trust but was its near neighbor. She had $11. She had not slept flat in 9 days. Cora had a cough that had not cleared, and she had no money for a doctor. She said, "I need to know your last name." He said, "Moretti." She did not know the name. She was from 3 states away and had come to the city with nothing but a bag and a direction and the conviction that any forward motion was better than standing still in a house where the walls had learned to flinch. She said, "All right, Dante Moretti. We will take the apartment." The building on Carmine Street was a narrow 4-story townhouse with a green awning over the ground floor entrance and a hand-painted sign above the door that read Rosa's Kitchen, in gold letters on a deep burgundy background. The windows were bright. Shelby could smell garlic and rosemary from the sidewalk. Dante unlocked the side entrance, which opened onto a clean stairwell with cream-colored walls and a single pot of yellow chrysanthemums on the landing. He led them up 1 flight and opened the door to apartment 2A. It was small and it was perfect. The kitchen had a real stove and a full-sized refrigerator with a fresh box of baking soda inside. The living room had a sofa in a deep forest green and 2 windows that looked out over a narrow back garden where someone had strung lights between a magnolia tree and the back fence. The 2 bedrooms each had a bed made up with white sheets and a quilt. One of the quilts was covered in yellow stars. Cora walked directly to the room with the yellow star quilt, climbed onto the bed without taking off her shoes, pressed both palms flat against the quilt and said, "This is mine." Ava stood in the doorway of the second bedroom and looked at the bed and the white curtains and the small wooden desk in the corner. She said nothing. Her face was doing something complicated. Shelby stood in the kitchen doorway and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. Then she put her hand down and turned around. Dante was still in the entryway. He had not come further than the threshold, which she noticed. He said, "The refrigerator has some basics in it. There is a corner grocery 2 blocks east. My Aunt Rosa is downstairs during the day if you need anything. She knows you are coming." Shelby said, "How does she know we are coming? You only decided this an hour ago." He held up his phone slightly. "I called ahead from the deli." Shelby said, "Mr. Moretti, I need to ask you directly. What kind of man are you?" He stood with his hands in the pockets of the cobalt coat and he looked at her with those clear dark eyes and he said, "The kind who is trying to become a different kind. That is the most honest answer I can give you." She held his gaze. "That is a strange thing to say." "It is a strange situation," he agreed. "Get some sleep. We can talk more when you have." He left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs and the quiet click of the side door. Shelby stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she ran the hot water in the kitchen sink, just to watch it run, and she stood with her hands under the warm stream until the ache in her shoulders began very slowly to loosen. Rosa appeared at the door about 20 minutes later with a covered dish of pasta e fagioli and a plate of warm bread wrapped in a clean cloth. She was in her mid-60s, round-faced and silver-haired, wearing a bright teal apron over a yellow blouse with the sleeves rolled up. She set the food on the kitchen table without ceremony and then looked at Ava and Cora with the specific warmth of a woman who had been feeding other people's children her entire adult life. She said, "You eat first, then you sleep. Tomorrow is for questions." Shelby said, "His name? Moretti. I looked it up just now." She held up her phone slightly. Rosa sat down in one of the kitchen chairs. She said, "What did you find?" "Enough," Shelby said quietly. "A family name that shows up in certain kinds of news stories. A business that is not only a business." Rosa looked at her steadily. She said, "That is true. It was also true of my brother, who was Dante's father, and of his father before him. And Dante has been trying to close the door on that for 3 years now. He is building a hotel, a real one with architects and permits and an honest payroll. He is getting out." She paused. "He did not have to stop in that park today. He stopped because of something that lives in him that his father never put there. His mother put it there." Shelby looked at the covered dish. The smell of rosemary and tomato and something warm and specific was filling the kitchen. Ava had come to the table and was sitting with her hands folded, waiting. Shelby said, "Is he dangerous to us?" Rosa said, "No. I have known that boy since he was 4 years old. He is not dangerous to a woman on a bench with 2 children. He is the furthest thing in the world from that." Shelby uncovered the pasta dish. She served her daughters first. Rosa poured 3 glasses of water and 1 of apple juice and sat with them at the table and did not make it into anything larger than what it was. Dinner on a Tuesday with new people who had needed a place to sit. Later, after the girls were asleep in their separate beds, Shelby lay flat on the sofa in the forest green sitting room and stared at the ceiling and breathed the way she had not been able to breathe in a car. All the way in, all the way out, with room for it. She did not fully trust yet. She was too well trained in the architecture of men who seemed good at first. But she had seen the way Dante had crouched down to Cora's level. She had seen the way he had not come past the threshold. She had seen the way Rosa had talked about him, and Rosa's face was not a face that had ever learned to lie about anything. She closed her eyes. Outside, the lights in the magnolia tree were still on, and through the curtains their glow made the room into a soft and steady amber. She slept for 10 hours without waking once. He came by on Thursday afternoon, 3 days after they moved in, and knocked twice on the door of apartment 2A. He was wearing a deep burgundy shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and the tattoos on his forearms were fully visible in the daylight. Dense geometric work on the left arm, and on the right a single phrase in large Italian script that Shelby had gotten close enough by now to read, "Non dimenticare de dove vieni." Do not forget where you come from. Shelby opened the door in a royal blue wrap dress she had bought at the thrift store 2 blocks away with some of the money he had left in an envelope on the kitchen table the first morning, which had caused a 10-minute argument between her and Rosa that Rosa had won through the simple tactic of refusing to take it back. She stepped aside to let him in. Ava was at the kitchen table doing homework. Cora was in the middle of the living room floor building something architectural out of blocks that Rosa had produced from somewhere in the restaurant's back storage, the way Rosa produced most things, without explanation and with complete confidence that they were needed. Dante sat on the sofa. He accepted the coffee Shelby made without comment and he said hello to Ava, who said hello back and then returned to her homework. He watched Cora build for a moment. He said, "What is it going to be?" Cora said without looking up, "A house with 2 front doors." He said, "Why 2?" Cora said, "So nobody gets stuck on the wrong side." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That is good thinking." Shelby sat in the chair across from the sofa and looked at him. She said, "You said in the park that you had a question like Cora's. When you were her age." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. He said, "I was 7. My father was away a lot. My mother was running the house on whatever he left her, which was not always enough, and she would not ask him for more because asking him for things had costs." He stopped. "I came into the kitchen one morning and she had been crying, and there was not much in the refrigerator, and I asked her if we were going to be all right." He set the coffee cup on the side table. She said yes. She always said yes. But I could see it was not true, and I could not do anything about it because I was 7. Shelby said, "And your father was not the kind of man you could tell this story to and expect a reasonable response," Dante said. "He was powerful in the way that some men are powerful, which is by making sure everyone around them is a little afraid. I decided very early that I did not want to be that kind of powerful." He looked at the tattoo on his right forearm. "Though it takes a while to figure out what you want to be instead." Shelby said, "Rosa told me you are building a hotel." He said, "The Moretti Grand. On the waterfront. We break ground in 6 weeks. 12 stories, a restaurant on the ground floor, full conference facilities. Legitimate from top to bottom, every contractor licensed, every dollar accounted for." He said this the way people say things they have been working toward for long enough that the words have worn smooth with use. "It is the thing I have been building toward since I was old enough to understand that what my family did was not the only option. But it has taken this long," Shelby said. "It was not a judgment. It was a question about how these things work. You do not simply walk out the door of a family business," he said. "There are obligations. There are people who depend on the structure. You dismantle it carefully or you dismantle people along with it, and I was not willing to do that." He looked at her directly. "It is almost done. I am almost out." Ava looked up from her homework. She said, "My mom was almost out too. It took her a while." The room was quiet for a moment. Shelby looked at her daughter with the combination of pride and pain that Ava regularly produced in her. She said, "Yes. It did." Ava said, "Is almost out a real kind of out?" Dante said, "I think it is the realest kind. Because you know exactly what you are leaving and you are choosing to leave it anyway." Ava considered this. Then she went back to her homework with the air of someone who has received a satisfactory answer. Cora finished the block structure and stood back to assess it. She had built a wide, squat building with a clear opening on each of the 2 longest sides. She said, "Dante, look. Both doors." He leaned forward and looked at it seriously. He said, "Nobody gets stuck." "Nobody gets stuck," Cora agreed and sat down inside the structure to confirm this in person. Shelby watched Dante watch her daughter settle herself inside the small built walls, and she noticed the expression on his face, the specific tenderness of a person who has lived most of their life at a careful distance from softness and does not know quite what to do when it arrives. She said, "Thank you for stopping in the park." He looked at her. He said, "I should have found that bench 20 years ago. I just needed someone to build it first." Sal Conti arrived at Dante's office on the top floor of a commercial building on Hudson Street on Friday morning wearing a charcoal blazer over a shirt the color of old ivory. He was 58 years old and had served as the family's senior advisor for 22 of those years, and he moved through any room with the particular authority of a man who has never been told to wait outside. He sat down across from Dante's desk and he said, without any warm-up, "Tell me about the woman on Carmine Street." Dante was looking at a set of architectural drawings spread across his desk. He did not look up immediately. He said, "Her name is Shelby Carter. She is a guest of the building." "The family's building," Sal said. "Rosa's building," Dante said. "As it has been for 40 years." Sal said, Dante. We are in a sensitive moment in the transition. We have 2 ongoing contracts that have not yet been fully resolved. We have people watching everything we do. A woman who came from nowhere with no ties and no history in this world, living above our primary residence property raises questions. Dante set down his pen and looked at Sal directly. He said, "She is a mother with 2 children who had been sleeping in a car for 9 days. She is not a liability. She is a person." "Those are not mutually exclusive," Sal said. "They are in this case." Dante's voice was even. It was the evenness that the people who knew him best recognized as a full stop, not a comma. "She stays. She is safe. Nobody asks her questions about the family. That is settled." Sal looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "The other matter." He slid a folded paper across the desk. "A missing person report was filed 3 days ago in the name of Shelby Carter. Filed by a Derek Carter. Husband." Dante unfolded the paper. "You read it?" He was quiet. He said, "This is a control move, not a genuine report." "Probably," Sal said. "The question is whether it brings attention we do not need right now." "The question," Dante said, refolding the paper, "is whether it brings a problem to her. And I am going to make sure that it does not." He picked up his phone and dialed. When the call connected, he said, "Nico, I need you to sit down with our attorneys this afternoon. There is a report filed in the name of a woman staying at the Carmine Street building. I want a protective legal strategy ready by Monday morning." He ended the call and set the phone down. Sal was watching him with the expression he used when he was revising a calculation. Sal said, "You are personally invested in this woman." Dante said, "I am personally invested in not repeating a pattern that has run in this family for too long. She is the specific occasion for that. She is not the only reason." He returned to the architectural drawings. "That will be all, Sal." Downstairs on Carmine Street, Shelby did not know about the missing person report yet. She was in the apartment with Cora, who had developed the cough that had been threatening for a week, and Rosa had already sent for the family physician, a man named Dr. Agosta, who came within the hour and confirmed a mild bronchial infection and prescribed a liquid antibiotic that Nico produced from a pharmacy within 30 minutes. Shelby stood in the kitchen with the antibiotic bottle in her hand and the receipt, which showed it had been paid for, and she felt the familiar vertigo of receiving help from people whose help came without a ledger. She had lived for 6 years with help that had a ledger. She knew in her body the difference in weight between a gift and a debt. She thought about what Rosa had told her and what Dante had said in the park, and the way he had crouched to Cora's level. She thought about the envelope of money left on the kitchen table without a note, and the way he had not come past the threshold, and the phrase on his forearm that she could now translate. "Do not forget where you come from." She put the antibiotic bottle on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the narrow garden below, where the magnolia tree was just beginning to show its leaves. She thought, "The question is not whether this man is complicated. The question is whether complicated is the same as dangerous." She had learned, at great cost, that some complicated men were the most dangerous kind. She was learning, more slowly, that some complicated men were complicated precisely because they were fighting against the dangerous thing in themselves. She was not sure yet which kind Dante Moretti was. But she was beginning to notice that every piece of evidence she collected pointed the same direction. That evening, Dante sent a message through Rosa. He would stop by tomorrow to talk to her. There was something she should know. Shelby read the message and set her phone face down on the kitchen table. She said to Ava, who was watching her from across the table, "He is going to tell me something." Ava said, "Is it bad?" Shelby said, "I do not know yet." Ava said, "But you are going to listen." Shelby said, "Yes. I am going to listen." The site on the waterfront was loud with machinery and clean in the way that active construction is clean, the kind of clean that is really organized purpose. Shelby stood at the edge of the temporary viewing platform in a cobalt blue blazer over a cream blouse, her braids pinned up, and looked out at the rising steel skeleton of what would be the Moretti Grand Hotel. It was bigger than she had expected. It occupied the entire footprint of a former industrial lot, and the bones of it were already tall enough to block the midday light on one side of the platform. Dante stood beside her with his forearms on the railing. He was in a deep navy coat and his sleeves were down today, the tattoos out of sight, and he looked less like the man from the park and more like an executive, except for the way he watched the construction, with the same kind of absorbed, possessive attention that she used to watch her daughters sleep. He had told her about the missing person report that morning at the apartment, sitting at the kitchen table while the girls were in school and Rosa was downstairs in the restaurant. He had told her directly, without softening it, and he had also told her that by Monday morning there would be a legal response ready and that she did not need to do anything. She had not cried. She had known Derek would do something like this. She had counted on it in the way you count on a bad winter, not hoped for but prepared for. She had said, "What kind of legal response?" He had said, "A restraining order filed by our attorneys. With the documentation from the original police reports we pulled, the medical records from 2 years ago, and an affidavit from you if you are willing to provide one." He had paused. "My attorneys are very good at this. And I have connections with the relevant offices that ensure it will be processed quickly and will hold." She had looked at the kitchen table for a moment. Then she had said, "I will provide the affidavit." He had nodded once. Then he had said, "I would like to show you something. If you have time today." Now she was standing on the viewing platform at the waterfront site and looking at 12 stories of becoming. He spread the floor plan out on the wide railing, holding the corners against the wind with a coffee thermos on one side and his left hand on the other. He walked her through it. Lobby, restaurant, event spaces on the second floor, 12 floors of guest rooms, a rooftop terrace. He explained the staffing model. He talked about the hospitality program he wanted to build, the team he was assembling. He said, "The guest experience director position is something I have been trying to fill for 3 months. The person needs to understand what it feels like to walk into a hotel and need it to be good, not just functional. To understand what it means to a family when the room is clean and the sheets are fresh and there is a real kitchen and the children can breathe easily." He paused. "I have interviewed a dozen candidates with the right credentials and none of them have understood that specific thing." Shelby said, "You are not asking me about a job." He said, "I am asking you about a job." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the floor plan. His profile was steady. She said, "I was a hotel housekeeper for 3 years before I met Derek. I worked my way up to floor supervisor. I know what a well-run room feels like from the floor up." He said, "I know. Rosa told me." She said, "Rosa tells you things." "Rosa is my entire intelligence network," he said. It was the first purely dry thing she had heard him say, and the smile that came with it was small and real and changed the whole shape of his face. She looked back at the building. She said, "A job that I earned." "Yes," he said. "Based on your experience, which is directly relevant, and which you will be compensated for properly." She said, "I would need to see the job description." He reached inside his coat and produced a folded sheet of paper and placed it on the floor plan in front of her. She picked it up. She read it. He was quiet while she read, which was a quality she had been noticing. His willingness to be quiet while she did the thinking. The floor plan shifted in the wind and she put her hand down to anchor it and his hand was already there and their fingers rested beside each other on the paper for a moment before she looked up. He did not move his hand away quickly. Neither did she. He said carefully, "That is not a condition of the job offer." She said, "I know." The waterfront wind came through clean and cold and carried the smell of salt water and construction dust and somewhere from a lunch cart 2 blocks away, the particular smell of hot coffee and something fried and good. She said, "I will read the full description tonight and give you an answer by Thursday." He nodded. He straightened the floor plan. He said, "That is perfectly reasonable." They stood on the viewing platform for another few minutes, looking at the steel frame of the Moretti Grand Hotel against the bright afternoon sky, and neither of them said anything else, and it was the specific quiet of 2 people who are beginning to understand that the same direction is taking shape in front of them. He appeared on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the move to Carmine Street. Shelby came downstairs to Rosa's kitchen to pick up a tray of breakfast that Rosa had sent word about, and she stepped out through the restaurant's front door into the clean spring morning and she saw him standing on the opposite sidewalk. Derek Carter was a large man, and he stood with his arms crossed and his shoulders set the way she had memorized, the specific posture that came before the specific voice that came before the specific set of choices she had spent years navigating. He saw her in the same moment. He uncrossed his arms and took a step toward the street. Behind her, the restaurant door opened and Nico Ferrara stepped out. Nico was not a tall man but he was built like a promise, and he stood beside Shelby on the sidewalk with his hands in the pockets of his olive green jacket in a way that communicated, with complete efficiency, that the distance between the opposite sidewalk and the Moretti building's front door was not a distance that was going to close. Derek stopped at the edge of the curb. Nico said quietly to Shelby, "Go inside. We have this." She said, "I want to hear it." He considered this for a moment and then nodded. Derek said from across the street, "Shelby, I filed that report for your protection. You left without telling anyone where you were going. I was worried." She said nothing. She had been told, by Dante's attorney who she had met on Monday morning in a clean office with a view of the park, to say nothing directly to Derek and to let the legal instrument do the talking. A car pulled up to the curb beside Derek. A woman in a red blazer got out carrying a document envelope. She was one of 3 attorneys that Dante's firm had assigned to this matter, and she moved with the brisk authority of someone who had filed 15 of these and won 14 of them. She introduced herself to Derek and handed him the envelope. She said, in the particular tone of an attorney delivering formal notice, "This is a temporary restraining order, issued this morning by the Honorable Judge Caruso of the Family Court, prohibiting you from coming within 1,000 feet of Shelby Carter, Ava Carter, and Cora Carter. A hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from Thursday to make it permanent. I strongly advise you to retain counsel." Derek looked at the envelope. He looked at Nico. He looked across the street at Shelby in her cobalt blazer, standing in the morning light in front of the restaurant, and she could see the calculation moving across his face, the specific calculation of a man assessing the landscape and finding it different from what he had expected. He took the envelope. He said, "This is not over." The attorney said, "It is over for today. Good morning." She returned to the car. Derek stood on the sidewalk for another moment. Then he turned and walked away, and Shelby watched him go until he turned the corner and the street was simply the street again. The delivery truck making its rounds, the coffee shop across the way opening its awning, the pigeons doing their business near the grate. Nico said, "You all right?" She said, "Yes." She meant it. Her hands were not shaking, which surprised her and then did not. She thought, this is what it feels like to stand on ground that holds you up. She had forgotten the difference. She went inside and told Rosa what had happened. Rosa poured 2 cups of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Now, tell me everything and then drink this and we will talk about what comes next." Upstairs, Shelby called Dante. He answered on the second ring. She said, "It worked." He took the papers and walked away. Dante said, "The hearing in 2 weeks is the important one. Our team is prepared. They will make the permanent order very easy to get." She said, "Dante. Thank you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How are the girls?" She said, "They are at school. They do not know about today." He said, "Good. Let them stay in school and not know about today for as long as possible." She said, "Yes." She looked out the window at the narrow garden, the magnolia tree fully in leaf now, catching the morning light. "I accepted the job offer, by the way. I was going to tell you Thursday, but it seemed like the right morning to say it." There was a pause on the line that had a specific quality to it, not of surprise but of something settling into place. He said, "I am glad." She said, "Me too." The meeting was held in a private dining room above a supper club on West Street that the Moretti family had used for internal discussions for 15 years. The walls were a warm cream and the table could seat 12. On this Tuesday evening, 6 men were seated around it, including Dante and Sal Conti and Nico Ferrara and 3 others whose names were known in certain circles and not in others. Dante had called the meeting himself. He sat at the head of the table in a deep forest green jacket over a white shirt, the tattoos on his forearms visible where he had rolled his cuffs back. He had a folder in front of him and he had been to the hotel site that afternoon and there was still construction dust on the cuffs of his trousers, which he had not bothered to brush off. He opened the meeting by putting the folder at the center of the table and saying, "This is the transition plan. Complete. The hospitality company is registered. The hotel opens in 4 months. Every outstanding obligation from the previous business model has been addressed or is in the final stage of resolution. I am calling this meeting to close the book." Sal Conti said, "There are those of us who are not prepared to close the book." Dante said, "Tell me specifically." Sal said, 2 of the import arrangements are still generating revenue. Closing them now costs the organization significantly in the short term. The hotel will not be profitable for at least 18 months. That is a gap. Dante said, "I know the numbers, Sal. I built the numbers. The gap is covered by the property sale on Flatbush and the licensing income from the restaurant brand. I did not bring everyone here to debate the gap. I brought everyone here to confirm the direction." Sal said, "The direction has costs that go beyond revenue. There are people in this organization who have operated a certain way for a long time. You are asking them to change not just their income source but their identity." Dante looked at him steadily. He said, "Yes, I am." He paused. "And I understand that is not a small thing. Which is why I have a specific offer for you, Sal, and for each person at this table who needs a place in the new structure." He passed a sheet of paper to each person at the table. He said, Financial consultant to the Moretti Hospitality Group. A salary, benefits, a defined role in the legitimate operations. For you specifically, Sal, it is the kind of advisory work you have been doing for 20 years, applied to a context that does not require you to operate in the gray. Sal looked at the paper. He was quiet for a long time. Dante said, I am not asking you to pretend the last 20 years did not happen. I am asking you to choose what the next 20 look like. Around the table, the other men were reading their sheets. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. Traffic, a siren somewhere distant, the baseline rhythm of a neighborhood that had no idea what was being decided in the room above it. One of the men across the table, a heavy-set man named Carlucci, said, I have 2 boys in college. Dante said, I know. The salary on your sheet reflects that. Carlucci said, all right then. One by one, the men at the table looked at their sheets and looked at Dante and said some version of all right, then. It was not a joyful moment. It was the moment when a heavy door is pulled shut and the sound of it reverberates in the room for a second before the new quiet takes over. Sal was last. He looked at his sheet for a long time. Then he looked at Dante and said, your father would not recognize this. Dante said, I know. Sal said, your mother would. Something moved across Dante's face. It was brief and it was real, and it was the kind of expression that a man like Dante did not usually allow out in a room with 6 people in it. Then it was gone. He said, yes. She would. Sal took a pen from his jacket pocket and signed the bottom of the sheet. He slid it back across the table to Dante. Dante looked at it. He said, thank you, Sal. Sal said, do not thank me. Just build a hotel that works. Dante said, that I can promise. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. The men left in 1s and 2s. Nico stayed until the room was empty and then looked at Dante and said, that is the last of it. Dante stood at the window of the private dining room and looked out at the street below, the ordinary Tuesday night of it, the people walking with their ordinary purposes in their ordinary coats. He said, yes. That is the last of it. Nico said, how do you feel? Dante said, like I should have done it 5 years ago. Nico said, you did it when you could. Dante said, yes. He turned away from the window. He picked up his jacket. He said, I am going to go check on a restaurant on Carmine Street. Nico said nothing, but the expression on his face was the particular expression of a man who has watched his employer make many decisions and has just witnessed the most consequential one, and is choosing wisely to say nothing about it at all. Rosa had a habit of leaving the restaurant kitchen light on when she went upstairs to her apartment on the 3rd floor, and on the night that Dante came by at 10 o'clock, the warm light from the kitchen was the only light on the ground floor, casting a long rectangle through the service door into the dining room where Shelby sat at a corner table with a cup of tea and the hospitality staffing model she had been building for the hotel opening. She heard the side door and looked up. He came in from the street in his navy coat, his hair damp from the light rain that had started an hour ago. He looked at her in the corner of the dim restaurant and he said, Rosa told me you were still up. I should not have come by this late. She said, sit down. He sat across from her. He was still wearing the forest green jacket from the meeting. She could see something in his face that was different from the usual composure, something that had been moved out of its usual place. She said, how did it go? He said, it is done. The organization has closed. The transition is complete. Everything from here is the hotel. She set down her pen. She said, that is everything you were working toward. He said, yes. She said, how do you feel? He looked at the table. He said, like a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just put it down, and is not entirely sure what to do with his hands. She understood this in a way that was not intellectual. She had put down her own heavy thing 11 weeks ago on a midnight road with a bag in the back of a car and 2 sleeping children and $11 in a Ziploc bag. The specific feeling of it, the combination of terrifying lightness and not knowing what came next, was not a thing you forgot. She said, you put your hands on the next thing. He looked at her. She said, you build the hotel. You run it well. You hire the people who understand what it means to walk in needing it to be good. You find out who you are when you are not managing a legacy. She looked at him steadily. That is what I have been doing for 11 weeks. I'm still figuring it out. But it is better than the thing before it. Every day it is more clearly better. He said, Ava and Cora. She said, Ava got 100 on a math test last week and told the teacher the problem had been poorly designed, but she answered it anyway. Cora asked Rosa this morning if she could come and live in the restaurant when she grows up. He said, and you? She said, I am sitting in a restaurant at 10 o'clock at night building a staffing model for a hotel opening, and I am not afraid of any of the things I was afraid of 4 months ago. That is who I am now. That is the person who walked into the park with $11 and no plan and somehow came out the other side with a job she earned and a table with a kitchen light on. He was looking at her with the expression she had been learning, the one that appeared when he dropped the composure he usually wore like a second coat. It was the expression of the man from the park, the man who had crouched to Cora's level and asked about the river. He said, "Shelby." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have been trying to find the right time to say something to you for about 6 weeks. And the right time keeps not arriving, so I am going to say it in a restaurant at 10 o'clock at night in front of a staffing model." She said, "All right." He said, "I am in love with you. I have been since sometime around the day Cora showed me the house with 2 front doors. I'm not saying it to change anything about the job or the apartment or any of the arrangements we have, because none of that is connected to this. I am saying it because I have been honest with you about everything else and I will not be dishonest about this." The kitchen light hummed gently. The rain tapped against the front windows. Somewhere above them in the apartment upstairs, Ava and Cora were asleep. Shelby said, "I know you are not saying it to change anything. That is part of why I trust it." She said, "I love you too, Dante. I have been figuring out for weeks whether that was true and whether it was safe to say. And it is both." He reached across the table and she put her hand in his, and the specific quality of that contact, not desperate, not performed, just 2 people arriving at the same place at the same time and choosing to be there, was the thing she would carry forward. Upstairs, on the other side of Rosa's kitchen door, which had been slightly open for the last 20 minutes for reasons Rosa would have described as ventilation, a small sound of deep satisfaction was heard. Then the light above the stairs went on and off twice, which was Rosa's signal for good night. Dante looked up at the ceiling. He said, "She has been listening." Shelby said, "She has been listening since the deli." He said, "Fair enough." She laughed, and it was the specific laugh of a woman who had not laughed in a very long time and had just remembered how it sounded. The Moretti Grand opened on the first Friday of October, which arrived with a sky so blue and clear it looked less like weather and more like an intention. By 6 in the evening the lobby was full. The marble floors held the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows and threw it back in long, clean panels. The arrangement of pale gold chrysanthemums on the central reception desk was Shelby's choice, made 2 weeks earlier in a meeting with the florist, because she had seen those flowers on the landing of the Carmine Street stairwell on the first night and they had meant something to her about the possibility of ordinary beauty in an unexpected place. She was in a sapphire blue evening gown, fitted at the waist, her natural hair down and full and braided at the crown. She moved through the lobby with the quiet authority of a woman who had built the systems that made this room work. The staff rotations, the guest orientation protocol, the housekeeping standards she had written from memory and field-tested floor by floor over 3 months. She knew every member of the evening staff by name and the names of their children, and she had, over the course of 3 months, hired 42 people, 21 of whom had come from circumstances that most hiring managers would have called a liability. She did not call them liabilities. She called them people who understood what it meant to walk into a room and needed to be good. Rosa was at a corner table in the restaurant on the ground floor in a bright red dress with her silver hair pinned up, looking like a woman who had always known this night was coming and had simply been waiting for the calendar to confirm it. She had already identified the dessert trolley's most promising items and was entertaining Ava and Cora, who were in matching emerald green dresses, with a story about the first restaurant she had ever opened, which had involved a stove that worked on 3 burners and a menu written in chalk on a piece of cardboard. Ava was listening with her full systematic attention. Cora was eating a small chocolate item from the trolley with the focused application she brought to anything she considered important. Nico Ferrara stood near the entrance in a charcoal suit and the particular relaxed readiness of a man who had spent 20 years keeping things running and was now keeping them running in a building with doormen and a sommelier. Sal Conti arrived at 7:15 and stood in the lobby for a moment, looking up at the 12-story atrium with an expression that had in it something beyond accounting. He was wearing a dark navy blazer and the pocket square was burgundy, and when he saw Dante coming across the lobby toward him he said, without preamble, "It is a real hotel." Dante said, "It is a real hotel." Sal said, "It is a good one." Dante said, "Yes, it is." Sal nodded once, the nod of a man completing a transaction that has taken 3 years to close. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and moved toward the restaurant. At 8 o'clock, Dante crossed the lobby and found Shelby near the concierge desk reviewing a small tablet with the evening's arrival log. He was in a midnight navy suit with a white shirt and his cuffs were rolled back because he had been carrying boxes from the service entrance an hour ago and had not bothered to fix them, and the tattoos on his forearms caught the lobby light. He said, "The concierge log can wait." She looked up. She said, "The Hendersons in room 714 are arriving late and they have a 4-year-old who will need a cot." He said, "The cot is already up there." I called ahead. She looked at him. She said, "You called ahead?" He said, "I learned from the best operations director in the building." She set the tablet down on the concierge desk. He said, "Come with me for a minute." He led her through the lobby and up one flight via the main staircase, which had a view over the entire ground floor through the glass railing, the lobby and the restaurant and the bar and the full room of people below, all of it working, all of it real and honest and built from the ground up by the two of them and 50 other people who had believed it was possible. They stopped on the landing. Shelby looked down at it. She said, "Dante." He said, "Look at it. Really look at it." She did. She looked at the chrysanthemums and the marble floor and the staff in their uniforms and Rosa at her corner table and the girls in their green dresses and the whole bright, working, honest thing of it. She said, "I am looking." He said, "You built this. Not the steel, not the walls. The part that makes it this." Then he turned to face her. He reached into his jacket and he held something between his fingers. A ring, a round stone the color of deep red, set in gold, simple and particular. He said, "I have been carrying this since the day I took you to the construction site and you put your hand on the floor plan. I have been waiting for the right time." He looked at her. "There is never a right time except the time when you are certain, and I have been certain since about 6 weeks in. I was just waiting to show you the finished building first." She said, "So the hotel opening was a long proposal setup." He said, "It was a long proposal setup." She laughed. Then she looked at the ring and at his face and at the lobby below, and she thought about a bench in a park on an afternoon that had not known it was about to matter, and a little girl pressing a stick into the dirt with complete concentration, and $11 in a Ziploc bag and warm sheets and a kitchen light left on. She said, "Yes, Dante Moretti?" "Yes." He put the ring on her finger. Below them, at the corner table in the restaurant, Rosa let out a sound of complete satisfaction and raised her champagne glass to no one in particular. Ava looked at Cora. Cora said, "Are they doing it?" Ava said, "Yes." Cora said, "Good," and returned to the chocolate item on the trolley. Dante kept Shelby's hand in both of his and they stood on the landing above the lobby of the Moretti Grand and looked down at the whole bright, honest room below them. She said, "Nobody gets stuck." He said, "Nobody gets stuck." And all the doors were open.